welcome to episode 252 of Cinematary. I'm your host, Zach Dennis, and I'm here with
Lydia Creech,
Michael O'Malley.
And in today's episode, we will be talking about movies that we saw this week in part 1. And in part 2, we will be continuing our Young Critics Watch Old Movies series with 1920s Within Our Gates. But let's go ahead and jump into movies that we saw this week. And Lydia, I'm going to kick it off with you. You saw a new release, which has been kind of mixed. Some people have really liked it. Some people have been kind of mellow on it. So tell us a little bit about The Dead Don't Die.
All right, The Dead Don't Die. It's Jim Jarmusch's latest film. It's got a ton of people in it. I feel like maybe that's been what it's been marketed on, like Bill Murray, Adam Driver, Tilda Swinton, Chloe Sevigny, Steve Buscemi, Danny Glover, Caleb Landry Jones, Rosie Perez, Iggy Pop, RZA, Selena Gomez, Tom Waits. Like, a lot of people make a lot of brief appearances.
It's kind of like Jim Jarmusch's version of like a Wes Anderson movie where it's all his buddies.
Yeah, even like they're doing him a favor. And the trailer for it makes it seem like it's gonna... I knew better just based on my experience with Jim Jarmusch movies, but the trailer makes it seem like it's gonna be really funny, because it's the end of the world. It's a zombie apocalypse movie, and like Bill Murray and Chloe Sevigny and Adam Driver play cops who in a small town who like just don't know how to deal with it. And I mean, yeah, I was right. I found it more clever than like laugh out loud funny. I think it's pretty clear that Jim Jarmusch really likes zombie movies. The Caleb Landry Jones character, he like wears a shirt with Nosferatu on it and like just knows about zombies. They all go around saying to each other, "You got to kill the head." Like, they live in a universe where where zombie movies exist, so they like know what to do. But it gets a little bit like too meta for its own good. Like Adam Driver, Jesus Christ! At one of the first, I guess, gags is he sticks a CD or turns on the radio, and The Dead Don't Die song comes on, which I'm unclear if that was written for the movie or if it's already a song, but he goes, "Yeah, that's the theme song of..." It's like, oh, okay. He knows he's in a zombie movie.
I've heard it kind of, or at least maybe it's Jarmusch talking about it kind of being something that was akin to a lot of like George Romero movies, like, you know, Night of the Living Dead, Dawn of the Dead, in that vein where it's these relatively normal people having to band together against this kind of apocalyptic thing. I guess what does he bring to that kind of Romero formula?
I would say so. The Romero zombie films have always been like pretty explicitly political or about some sort of social cause, right? And in this one, in the Romero movies, they don't know what's causing the ghouls. Like, there's no explanation, some like vague government mumbo jumbo. And in this one, there's all these like news report, like in a Romero film, you have like news broadcasters and radio things, so like kind of media around. And it's polar fracking has knocked the Earth off of its axis, and so it's making the days all weird, and that makes the dead come back. It's just really this is, and Chloe Sevigny's like, but the scientists said that wouldn't do anything. I just can't believe that they would lie to us. Well, like, polar fracking is bad. So like maybe that's kind of like, it's clearly some sort of commentary on, climate change or just science doing bad science stuff. And people, not ordinary people, that is, like, really not being able to deal with it, like, face the reality of what's happening. Because a huge part of zombie movies is like, okay, you've got to accept that dead people are walking around and you have to re-murder them, even if they look like your grandma. So those kind of tropes are in this. And they're slow zombies.
So, like, his other, like, big genre movie is, the vampire movie with...
Tilda Swinton.
Only Lovers Left
Only
Alive.
Lovers
Only Lovers
Left
Left
Alive.
Alive. Only Lovers Left Alive, right? So, in that movie, I would say that's much more a Jim Jarmusch movie than it is a vampire movie, although it clearly has, like, those, like, genre touchstones. Would you say, I mean, is this leaning closer to the Romero than the Jarmusch, or the other way around?
No, I think this is much more a Jarmusch, because the other... There's Only Lovers Left Alive, like vampires. I was thinking of like Dead Man, which is from the 90s, but again, it's like a Jarmusch take on a genre film. So it's got like the tropes in it, and it's referring to other westerns, just like this is referring to other zombie films. But it's more him than it is genre. Like, I was not ever particularly creeped out or scared, or like really, because the Romero movies are awfully funny, just... At least the second one he did. But this is not funny in the same way. Like, it's much more interested in making those references and, like, being clever than, like, a straight, like, absurdist joke sort of situation. Except for Tilda Swinton. I thought she was hilarious. She's just so weird.
That's funny, though, because I saw one interview where he was talking about somebody asked him, you know, if he enjoyed zombies, and he was like, no, not really. I like, you know, vampires a lot more. So it's strange that he has like this movie that's very built on being conscious of zombie pop culture lore.
I feel like maybe you can tell that he doesn't love zombies. I don't know, because, you know, Shaun of the Dead is the other like zombie comedy film that's made by someone who fucking loves zombie films. And all the I haven't seen it in years, but I remember all of the jokes in that like really working and like being very loving, like a loving homage. And I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I'm just kind of like, I feel like, not that he thinks he's better than the Romero tropes or whatever, but he's just like just doing them because he can prove that he knows it. Except for some weird shit with Tilda Swinton, which I won't spoil, because even Adam Driver didn't know that this was going to happen. And he's read the script.
Does he literally say that? Like...
Yes.
And so this is a character that like interacts with other characters? Is he kind of like an out of time like narrator character?
No, he interacts with the other characters. His refrain is, "This is going to end poorly," and all the other characters are like, "What the fuck are you talking about? Why do you know that? Stop saying that." And he's like, "I just know." Maybe I spoiled the joke, but I saw it coming the whole movie, so.
Well, but like, didn't you just say like it's like the beginning of the movie, the song drops or whatever, and he's like, "This is the theme song." That sounds like it's not much.
That's the theme song. Yeah. So I saw that joke coming. I mean, I read the scripts kind of at the end, but I was like, okay, no, this is a meta character. I see.
Well, I think The Dead Don't Die is in theaters around the place, you know, around everywhere, at least right now.
If it sounds interesting, check it out. But like,
it seems like a decent time, at least, you know, with the people involved. You know, it's like, you know, there's fun people.
Tom Waits is fun.
He generally is. But you had one other movie?
I did have one other movie, and this is okay. I watched Shampoo by Hal Ashby, co-written by and starring Warren Beatty. I've only ever seen this still image of the girl with her head flipped upside down, like in Warren Beatty's crotch, and he's like blow drying her hair, and it like looks like she's giving him a blow job. And that's the only thing I knew about Shampoo. So I was like, oh, this is going to be a sex farce. Like, it's going to be absurd and really funny. I'd seen Harold and Maude, so I knew like probably be a little bit dark. Holy shit, Shampoo is so sad, guys. Warren Beatty's character is such a sad fuck up. I guess I don't even know how to describe it. He's a beautician, and he's sleeping around with just basically anybody. But some of the people he's sleeping with are married to an important politician, And somehow they all wind up at this election eve party for Richard Nixon. And like everybody in this room has fucked everybody. And it's a bad situation. Like what a mess. But mostly Warren Beatty is just like can't help himself, I guess, around women, and he doesn't seem to have a life plan at all. His life plan was go to beauty school so that I can meet chicks. And it's not really working out for him. Have you seen it? I know you said you were interested in my take on it, Zach.
I have not seen it, but I enjoy Hal Ashby movies, so I'd be curious to check that one out.
I will say, I think I liked Shampoo, even though it's like actually really uncomfortable and not in the way I was expecting, because let's see, Warren Beatty's character is dating. Officially, she doesn't know about him sleeping around with everybody else. Goldie Hawn's character and his ex-girlfriend is played by Julie Christie, and both of them are really fantastic together because they're also kind of... Goldie Hawn goes to Julie Christie for advice when Warren Beatty's being a fuck up. I don't remember any of the characters' names, so... And it's just really funny how they all wind up at like this Richard Nixon election party, because none of like I mean, Warren Beatty just wants to get with chicks, and like
nowhere better than a Nixon party.
Is it like
right? And so it's also like, while it's being sad, it was absurd, and like Hal Ashby's got a wicked, like very mean sense of humor. So like just watching all of these people who are like sleeping with each other, all behind each other's back, like all maneuvering in the same like fucking ridiculous space, because like no election party for Richard Nixon is gonna be cool, right? And it's just like slowly losing my mind.
Is it like a political angle, or is Richard Nixon like that context is part of the farce?
Nope, couldn't figure that out. Maybe it was supposed to be, but I don't know. At the very end, Warren Beatty has like, I guess, been found, like, everybody gets mad and he's left with nothing. And he's like watching Richard Nixon's, I guess, acceptance speech on the TV, and he's going, "We aim to be a transparent administration." Good job, Dick. And I guess good job, Warren Beatty. So like, I have no idea if it's drawing a parallel between that. I don't think it is, because it's not a very good one, but it's just a weird backdrop. I'm not going to say Hal Ashby isn't saying anything, because I'm sure he's not a dumb filmmaker. But it's unclear to me exactly what it is, other than that's a pretty good joke right there at the end.
Interesting. I know it just recently got a Criterion release. Was it on the Criterion channel, or did you get it from the library?
I just watched it from the library, and I didn't check out any of the special features. I also really like Warren Beatty. I think he's very self-aware as an actor, and he's really funny even when he's being sad. So
yeah, but he didn't have any fun coats this time.
No, he had a leather jacket that he didn't really know what to do with. He was so... Oh. And a motorcycle.
I want a fur coat.
Goldie Hawn wears a fur coat because it's the 70s, so...
Well, I caught I guess this is a new release to an extent. It played at South by Southwest either last year or this year. But it is Wild Nights with Emily. It's directed by Madeline Olnick, and it stars Molly Shannon as Emily Dickinson. And the movie's pretty upfront with the fact that it is kind of playing with this long thought myth that Emily Dickinson had this romantic relationship with her childhood friend Susan, and it carried over throughout her whole life. Susan later would marry her Emily Dickinson's brother, but they would continue to carry on their romantic relationship. And so the film is very kind of irreverent in that sense. It's playing with the fact that there is some evidence, that people have found that kind of back up this claim, but at the same time, it could be completely some sort of fabricated myth that just came out of somewhere. It kind of plays, but it also out of somewhere, yeah. But it also plays with this. The thing that really struck me about it was how it plays with this the concept of who gets to tell the tales of history, and who the gatekeepers are, because this could very well have been something that was very much real, that was just discarded by the people who ended up taking Emily Dickinson's story after she died and kind of crafting the narrative of who she was as a person while she lived. Because you have this character played by Amy Seimetz, who is this woman who who had taken the collection of Emily's work and created a literary review of it that she's on tour selling. But she likes to. It's funny. Olnick, the director, does a really great job, and she actually had directed the play version of this as well. But she does a really good job of kind of doing this kind of split screen cross cutting between what Amy Seimetz's character Mabel is saying about her involvement with Emily Dickinson in her life and kind of what actually was taking place. And as you watch, this person really had no true connection to Emily Dickinson. She kind of has just this this kind of side almost breezing by the life that she's living. She literally plays piano for her downstairs and never sees her but plays piano for her downstairs while she's listening.
Emily doesn't want to see her.
Yeah, that's the other thing. Emily doesn't want to see. It's like this woman just seems deeply uninteresting to her, and so she's like, "No, I got better things to do. I'm gonna write," rather than try to talk to this woman who doesn't really offer anything other than a side hustle for my brother. And so. It also kind of incorporates this directing and editing style that I think, I guess the best correlation contemporarily would be kind of Wes Anderson. It kind of has this kind of cut and swivel to it. Molly Shannon has just this just gives this wonderful facial performance of it'll kind of cut over to Emily listening to generally some man talking about something, and she just gives this completely discerning look to what he's talking about. There's this wonderful gag midway through the movie where Ralph Waldo Emerson is visiting Susan's house, and Emily comes over and is like peeking through the door saying that she wants to hear from Emerson right before and before that, Mabel to the crowd of women she's talking about the book to talked about how much Emily Dickinson admired Ralph Waldo Emerson. And so you have Emily kind of poking her head through the door, and Susan's like, yeah, you can come listen to Ralph Waldo Emerson if you can understand him. And it cuts into the house, and he's just like, he has like this pipe in his mouth, and he's just kind of murmuring under like this, which again kind of goes back to this point that we have these figures of history that are become like these staples, these set in stone monoliths of our culture and our history that have kind of been, again, set in stone that we don't really question. And I think the thing that the movie poses, rather than trying to debunk this myth or do something with it, it kind of asks us to examine how we view the gatekeepers of our history, because it offers this life that Emily Dickinson was not just this reclusive, antisocial, just completely reserved woman. That she did have like this personality to her. She definitely was kind of quirky to an extent, but she also was overcoming a lot of she was overcoming a lot of the barriers that you would have to pass as a woman. There's this wonderful sequence with Brett Gelman playing this poetry review editor, and Emily kind of comes at him very hot, where she's just like asking him a lot of these questions and is very engaged. You can tell it's completely overbearing him. And then after he recovers from that, he proceeds to kind of as she refers to it, give surgery to her poem and pretty much give a nice late 19th century mansplain to her about why this wouldn't fit into his publication, and I think it just is a reminder that maybe the stories that we hear, especially about these female figures in history, are more indicative of the men who were kind of working as these liaisons for their work, and that we're not getting the full picture of who these women were as people. And that was kind of the takeaway I had from this. But Lydia, I know you caught this as well. I'm curious to hear if you had any other thoughts.
Yes, I think I liked it slightly less than you did. I think what it's doing, as far as like giving a fuller picture of Emily Dickinson and being very much upfront about like, we are correcting this misconception, which is kind of the joke as the Mabel gives her like lecture tour or whatever it is she's doing throughout the movie. Like they're like making fun of her and also be like, no, she's a liar. And also Emily Dickinson had a much fuller life than just like, oh, she's sad, she doesn't want to go outside. I thought it looked kind of cheap, which, I mean, it's an independent production, so it would, but to me, it compared very unfavorably to Terrence Davies' A Quiet Passion. But I think what's funny about that is Terrence Davies, like, as a kind of pretty repressed gay dude, very much amplified the myth of Emily Dickinson was just very reclusive and didn't want to date. And whereas Wild Night with Emily, I think one of the most important things it does, like, no, Emily had a relationship with Susan, who is her brother's wife. Like, they were a couple. And what Mabel and Emily's brother have done by creating this false narrative, essentially, of Emily Dickinson as like just proper lady, whatever, they've like erased Susan out of history. They've erased Emily's sexuality, and like, look, her poem, like Quiet Passion poems, like they were passionate and they were inspired by this real person and this real relationship that she had, and like it's great for that reasons. Can I talk about the very end of it? Dude.
Spoiler alert, I guess, for people.
What I think I'm not good at not spoiling things. The very final shot is Mabel like literally going through some of Emily's love poems, I guess, and letters, and like erasing, like you hear the eraser erasing Susan, her name, out of them, which people have proved. The end credits are from the actual archives. I don't remember which college has them, but you can see like imprinted in the paper like eraser marks where Susan's name has been taken out, which is pretty fucking cool.
It's such a powerful sequence because you have they kind of have these intertitles of explaining what research has been done to kind of better find a picture about her relationship with Susan, and so like you're reading these titles and you just hear like the sound of the eraser like in the background. I really love another note. I really love the sound design in this film. It does a really going back to that comparison to like a Wes Anderson movie. It does a great job of using sound to evoke kind of comedic moments. There's this one scene where Emily is presenting her poems to I guess a literary agent. It's him and his wife, and the wife was a childhood friend, and she's like talking about the possibility of them publishing her poems, and they never respond. They just sip their tea incredibly loudly, which gave me like Phantom Thread flashbacks or something.
I was also getting like Whit Stillman vibes.
I thought a lot of Love and Friendship while I was watching this.
Yeah.
It's funny. I agree with you on the production design being a little lackluster. I actually, after the movie, had dinner with a guy there is a historic preservationist. He goes in like around the country and preserves historic buildings and such. And he was laughing because he was like, "This is probably only something that I would notice," but he was talking about the chairs in the movie. He was like, the chairs were like worn down and looked like they had been heavily used. And he was like, the chairs that they used to like they were period centric, but if they were being true to the period, those would have been brand new, and they were like all run down and worn
chairs.
to look old. Yeah, and he was like, they would have been new chairs. They wouldn't have been run down and worn.
Yeah.
But he was like, that was maybe just a detail that only somebody like me would pick up on. But I think that just goes back to your point. Like, it doesn't have the panache of something like Love and Friendship or A Quiet Passion, which is much more detailed in its kind of period setting.
Like, if you're gonna do a period piece, production design, like, so important. But again, this probably didn't have the budget at all for it. So
yeah, but I
if you can get past that,
I think that there's a lot more that you should be engaged with outside of just kind of worrying about that, because I think Molly Shannon gives a really wonderful performance as Emily Dickinson. And if you're able to catch it, check.
I also liked Susan. Who is that actress?
Susan Ziegler. She, I guess, I haven't seen her in much, but I guess she has worked with the director previously. So yeah, she was really good as well.
She was really good too.
Yeah. And then I always like Brett Gelman showing up as a slimy mansplaining asshole. I don't know. He's really good at that role. I just had recently finished watching him in Fleabag, where he's just such a maniacal piece of shit, and it was kind of like he just plays like a slimy dude really, really well. But I will forever remember him as the guy who in the movie The Other Guys chases Mark Wahlberg and Will Ferrell down the street yelling, "Please have sex with my wife." So that's if you've seen The Other Guys, you'll know that scene. Wild Nights with Emily, though, it's in theaters now. Check out my review. It's on cinematary.com now. Michael, you had a couple. You're gonna have some Bong Joon-ho movies that you had seen. You wanted to run down real quickly.
Yeah, he had a few movies I hadn't seen that were expiring from Netflix streaming, and so I thought I'd watch them. The first one is one I guess I don't really have a lot to say about, but it's his debut, which is called Barking Dogs Never Bite, which is like this really bizarre, like, dark comedy satire thing where this guy is basically like serial murdering dogs in like an apartment complex, because at the beginning of the movie he hears this yappy dog and he finds what he thinks is the yappy dog and kills it, only to find out that there's another yappy dog that he's actually hearing, and so it like leads to this whole thing. And so that's kind of like the hook of the movie. And then since it's like an apartment complex, there's a whole bunch of other characters, including some people who like kind of live in the bowels of the apartment building, apparently, who like eat the dogs that the guy killed. It's and there's like there's like marital comedy drama thrown in there. Just frankly, I didn't get this movie very much. So I mean, there's like things that I enjoy because they're kind of absurd. The marital couple is always disagreeing over the numbers 50 and 100. So like, for instance, like they're walking back from a convenience store and the wife has forgotten something that they needed to get, and so she asks her husband to go back, and he's like, no, it's I couldn't go back. It must be 50 meters back to that store, and I'm not going to walk that far. She's like, nah, it's surely 100 meters. And so there's like extended sequences where they argue over that, and like there's little bits of it that's kind of absurd and funny and offbeat. But as a whole, like, I'm not really sure what the movie was going for, and I would be glad to have someone explain it to me, because I'm sure I'm just missing stuff. And maybe it's just not understanding like the Korean domestic milieu of the movie or whatever. But so that was one I watched. Have either of you guys seen that and want to explain it to me?
I have not seen that one.
Sorry, that's why I was laughing.
Unfortunately, please, listeners, write in or send us something and help Michael out.
I'm ready to be explained to everyone's least favorite thing I'm inviting right now. Please explain the movie to me. The other one is a bit more well-known, and I tracked with it a bit more. Mother from 2009, which is essentially like a crime procedural in which there is a a man who's like intellectually disabled, and his mother is basically taking care of him. I say man, but he's like a young adult, I guess, like late teens, early 20s. I'm not sure how old he is. And he becomes a suspect in a murder case, and is incarcerated because of that. And so the mother goes on this tear trying to prove her son's innocence. And so it's a lot about the relationship between the mother and her son, but also a lot of the like crime detective work. With the twist that this was a woman who's like in her 50s or 60s or whatever, and is not really trained in gumshoeing. So you get like extended sequences in which she is probably like doing things that are unconventional and foolish that she has to work her way out of in order to get the evidence. Like there's this really really mesmerizing sequence where she like has broken into this guy's house to obtain some evidence, and while she's there, the guy comes back, and so she's got to hide in the closet while he and his girlfriend are having sex in the next room or whatever. And then when they're asleep later on, she has to sneak out, and so there's this really long silent sequence in which she's like sneaking out of the room and trying not to step on crinkly things or whatever. And there's a lot of the movie of that where it kind of like this amateur detective work until you get to the end of the movie, and I'm not gonna spoil the specifics of it.
Please don't.
Yeah, we've had a lot of that. But basically, the end of the movie hinges on this really, really dark and thorny ethical dilemma that the mother finds herself in as a result of all of her sleuthing, basically. And so I found myself for a lot of the movie tracking with it, but being not engaged on the movie's terms of a detective procedural or whatever, but not really that riveted. And then the end of the movie comes around, which is this existential terror, ethical conundrum that just knocked me on my ass. And so it's a weird movie to talk about because a lot of what the power of the movie that remains with me is the end of the movie and how it culminates, which is not something that the first hour and a half or whatever really get into that much. So anyway, but I thought that was pretty good. I have not seen much of Bong Joon-ho's first decade as a filmmaker. I've seen Snowpiercer and Okja. I guess I've seen The Host, which is before Mother. But I wasn't familiar with these movies, even though I'd heard of Mother. And I would say of the two, Mother is definitely the one I got more out of.
Well, I recently caught his 2003 film Memories of Murder, which I guess was relatively inaccessible for a while, but has now been put on Amazon Prime. And it's set in 1986, and a lot of people have compared this to David Fincher's Zodiac film, because it follows the film starts and you see the body of this young woman who's been brutally raped and murdered, and they have these kind of small town detectives who are on the case trying to figure it out at first, but then this becomes kind of a series of rapes and murders under the same circumstances, and so a detective from Seoul joins them on the case, and so you have this very by the buttons more city focused detective playing off I forgot the actor's name, but he's the main character in The Host as well, and he's kind of buffoonish like that as also. So you kind of have these just two goofy these two goofy idiot detectives who are more known around town for literally they're known around town for bringing in perps, beating a confession out of them even if they didn't do it, and then letting them go. And so most of the time they're unable to further the investigation because these idiots are causing these witnesses to be hurt and causing protest from the city because they're like, the cops are just bringing people in and beating them up. But they start to kind of have to figure out a much more, streamlined plan as the murders keep happening and happening and happening. It's very much like it kind of earns that comparison to Zodiac just because it's very seeped in the procedural. It very much after watching a number of the kind of crime Kurosawa films, it kind of has that same ilk where it kind of introduces you to these characters and then invests you in the investigation that they're kind of going through. I think out of all of the Bong Joon-ho films that I've seen of his, because I've seen The Host and Snowpiercer and Okja. I haven't seen the two that you had talked about before, but I think this is definitely, one, his most polished film, and two, the one that really seems to kind of all come together. I think especially I remember with Okja, there was a lot of these ideas that I kind of liked, but they were never ever coalescing into like one perfect sum. And this one I think does that. I think it really it sucks you into this kind of brutal, dark neo noir sense that is really intoxicating. And like I said, the having these two kind of idiot detectives along with this much more serious detective, and just the ability of these kind of small town cops to figure out this very intricate murder is interesting to watch. So I would recommend, if you are wanting to watch more Bong Joon-ho movies, to check this one out as well.
One thing I didn't mention when I talked about this a little bit with the Barking Dogs Never Bite, but with Mother too, and I feel like one of the things that is like most idiosyncratic about Bong Joon-ho is the way he uses humor and humorous characters in his movies. And I've not seen Memories of Murder, but with Mother and a lot of his other movies, he has like you mentioned, he like centers on these buffoonish characters. And rather than making them comic relief, they're like the centerpiece of the movie, in which otherwise the world is very serious and stark. And I have mixed feelings on that in some of the movies, like in Okja. I feel like the humorous characters don't work very well relative to the serious stuff at around the humorous characters. And with Mother, it works a little bit better, but I guess you would say this is the movie where the humor works. Maybe you don't feel the same way as I do about his humor.
It really works in The Host.
Yeah. Memories of Murder is way more funny than it should be. It's a movie about a serial killer who's raping and murdering people. It's raping and murdering women. But the humor comes from just the complete ineptness of these detectives to come up with anything concrete. Like, they're just so stupid, and it becomes the humor is there, and then it just dissolves into being incredibly frustrating. So that felt real.
Yeah, Mother kind of has a similar dynamic in which like the characters that are like humorous are actively frustrating her investigation because of how they're acting. Which makes it an interesting dynamic in which they're funny, but also they're funny in a way which long term is contributing to like the kind of angst of the movie. Which is
all I know is that Bong Joon-ho and Hong Sang-soo should team up for like Dummy Men the movie, and just because those two can make some really like endearing dummy guys that you can follow.
I'd watch it.
We're going to take a short break, though. We will be back talking 1920s Within Our Gates after this.
Hey, Cinematariats. This is your co-host Lydia Creech with an important message during this break in the show. Cinematary would like you to know that we definitely want your money. We still want to bring you our pure, unadulterated opinions on the world of cinema, but now we're getting into the Patreon game, baby. We've brought on a lot of new voices to contribute to the site, and we want to honor our responsibility to compensate all these smart people for their hard work. To help us out, head over to patreon.com/cinematary to sign up at the $5 a month level. In exchange, our patrons will get an exclusive bonus episode every month, weekly shoutouts on each episode of the show, and the ability to dictate a movie for us to cover eventually. If money's tight, we get it. There are still a few things you can do that we would greatly appreciate. First, leave us a 5-star review on iTunes. That's free to help us reach more listeners. Secondly, send us a tweet at Cinematary, or better yet, send an email to Zach@cinematary.com. That's Zach, Z-A-C-H, to let us know your thoughts, and we will read them out and respond to them on future episodes. Finally, please share the show with friends and members of your family who you think would enjoy listening to and participating in our film discussions we put out every week. So, to recap, review, send us your thoughts through Twitter and email, share with your friends and family, and sign up to be a patron. We would truly appreciate it. Thanks for listening, and now back to the show.
With part 2 of episode 252 of Cinematary. In this part, we will be continuing our Young Critics Watch Old Movies series with 1920s Within Our Gates. This was written and directed by Oscar Micheaux. The film stars Flo Clements, Evelyn Preer, William Smith, and James D. Ruffin. The plot follows Sylvia Landry, who takes a fundraising trip to Boston in hopes of collecting $5,000 to keep a Southern school for impoverished black children open to the public. She then meets the warm-hearted Dr. Vivian, who falls in love with her and travels with her back to the South. There, Dr. Vivian learns about Sylvia's shocking, tragic past and realizes that racism has changed her life forever. Often regarded in the context of D.W. Griffith's The Birth of a Nation, which had appeared 5 years earlier, Micheaux's project has been considered by critics as a response to Griffith. The film's portrayal of lynching shows, quote, what blacks knew and northern whites refused to believe, turning the, quote, accusation of primitivism back onto white southern culture. Also in this period was the Chicago race riot of 1919. In which white mobs killed numerous blacks and burned residential districts, leaving thousands of blacks homeless. The critic Ronald J. Green believes that Micheaux had seen that blacks had fought back in Chicago and chose the title with an allusion to the risk to whites and future racial violence. James Weldon Johnson called the summer of 1919 the, quote, Red Summer, a reference to the high number of lynchings and race riots that took place that year. Micheaux scholar Jane Gaines has noted censors objected to D.W. Griffith's The Birth of a Nation because it told a completely fabricated version of American history. Within Our Gates, on the other hand, was criticized and censored because it told too much truth. Micheaux was born in 1884 in Metropolis, Illinois, the son of former slaves. After working a variety of jobs from waiter to steelworker, from Pullman porter to farmer, Micheaux wrote a memoir based on his experiences homesteading in South Dakota. The book, titled The Homesteader, attracted the attention of the Lincoln Motion Picture Company, a producer of race films. The project fell through due to a dispute over the control of the film. So Micheaux set about turning the book into a film on his own, under the auspices of his company, the Micheaux Book and Film Company. Micheaux completed and released the film in 1919, becoming the first African-American to direct a feature film. He followed The Homesteader, which is now lost, with his second feature, Within Our Gates, the following year. This was the second of more than 40 films that he directed. On a limited budget, Micheaux had to use borrowed costumes and props, and he had no opportunity to reshoot scenes for the film. Within Our Gates was initially rejected by the Board of Censors in Chicago when Micheaux submitted the film in December of 1919. An article in the Chicago Defender in January 17th of 1920 asserted that, quote, this is the picture that required 2 solid months to get by the censor boards. A week later, the Defender reported those who reasoned with the spectacle of last July in Chicago, ever before them, declared the showing preeminently dangerous, while those who reasoned with the knowledge of existing conditions, the injustices of the time, the lynchings and handicaps of ignorance, determined that the time is ripe to bring the lesson to the front. Critics of the film feared that scenes with lynching and attempted rape would spark interracial violence in a city still tense from the riots of July of 1919. Officials in Omaha, which also suffered a racial riot, New Orleans, and other cities objected for similar reasons when they blocked the screening of the film or demanded that those scenes be cut. After being presumed lost for decades, the film was found when a single print titled La Negra, the Black Woman, was discovered in Spain in the 1970s. A brief sequence in the middle of the film was lost. Only 4 of the original English intertitles survived, the rest having been replaced with Spanish intertitles when the film was distributed in Spain in the 1920s. In 1993, the Library of Congress Motion Picture Conservation Center restored the film as closely as possible to the original. Scott Simmons translated the Spanish titles back into English. He removed explanatory material added for Spanish audiences. He drew from the style and diction used by Michaud in his novels and the intertitles for Body and Soul, his only silent film to survive with the original intertitles. The missing sequence was summarized with an intertitle frame. Advertised as, quote, 8,000 feet of sensational realism, the film now exists in a print that is less than 6,000 feet in length, indicating a loss of approximately 30 minutes of the film's original 2-hour-long runtime. Film scholar Michelle Wallace on the film said, "The film's overall plot is highly convoluted, constituting a fascinating and cognate response to the racist accusations of Griffith and Dixon, the paternalism of Harris, and the naivete of Stowe in subsequent versions of Uncle Tom's Cabin. Michaud moves his narrative to the present, the Jim Crow era, and contrasts black rural existence, which seems to present the past, with black urban existence and the future of the race. By situating his narrative in the present of the early 20th century, Michaud wasn't just curbing his production budget. His emphasis is firmly placed upon what blacks are suffering now, not why they came to suffer or even whose fault it is." Scholar W. Fitzhugh Brundage in 2010 said on the film, "Like an overstuffed used bookstore, Within Our Gates invites close and repeated inspection. Although I've watched the film countless times, with each viewing I discover something previously overlooked. Michaud was a neophyte, self-taught filmmaker when he directed the film, and the intricacies of the film's plot are sometimes difficult to follow. Yet if the plot is understood as a triptych of related but distinct acts, the film's scope and ambitions become clear, indeed remarkable." So on that note, let's dig into Within Our Gates. Michael, I'm going to start with you because I know you've seen a couple other of Oscar Michaud's films, and so I'm curious to see how Within Our Gates, which it seems to be the one most people hail as his best film, stack up against those.
Yeah, I've seen, this is the 4th of his that I've seen, which, by the way, I've watched through that Kino Pioneers of African American Cinema collection, which is on Netflix, by the way. I would say this is like by far the most ambitious of his. The other movies like share a lot of the elements of this movie, like for instance the really convoluted plot, or the some of the like the way it gets kind of, I'm gonna say bogged down because I didn't really like it, but maybe other people did. The kind of like domestic drama or melodrama, with like marriage plots and things. It shares that. It also shares this kind of really kind of broad stroke, like heavy hand toward social issues, which I don't think is a bad thing at all. All of his movies have a really no bullshit policy about like the racism of the 1920s and 30s, and which I really appreciate. And a lot of his movies also deal with racial passing, which is something in, like, for instance, there's a movie of his called The Symbol of the Unconquered, which involves racial passing, as well as this movie called Veiled Aristocrats, which I watched actually right before this one, in which a black woman is able to, and man are both light-skinned enough that they're able to pass as white in society, but they have to kind of choose between, their family and, what they see as maybe a better or safer future among white people. This movie does kind of maybe the opposite thing with Sylvia, in the sense that she's like biracial but doesn't know it. This movie kind of fits in with that, like this this really interesting obsession with, you know, what makes up a racial identity and the ways in which like social layers play upon like you know what we or what their society may have viewed as something purely genetic, the you know the social factors in that.
Yeah.
And I would say, I mean, this is probably the best exploration of all of those pet themes. I think like maybe some of the other movies I've seen like maybe delve into some other stuff a bit more deeply, and maybe that's in the lost footage here. But like as far as the total package, Within Our Gates is definitely the best. Although I still think it's a little bit draggy at times and like has a it has this like mannered quality that makes some parts I think don't work super well, but the parts that do work really stunningly, especially the parts that like are, at least compared to the other movies that I've seen by him, like unique to this picture, which would be like the violence, which is not something that is, a lot of his other movies are kind of more stagey and more about like laws and kind of social interactions as opposed to like the brute force mob violence of like that you see at the end of Within Our Gates. And he kind of stages that mob violence in a more aesthetically striking way, I feel like, than the other stuff that's kind of within quote unquote polite society.
I want to go back to a point you made about kind of it breaking down the kind of different layers of what of the kind of story that it's presenting, because that's I think one of the things that is rubbed up against people wrong in terms of this film, just because it's so disjointed. There's a lot of parts that you kind of get lost because the plot's jumping around a bunch, and I'll admit I was kind of the same way at first, but the takeaway that I had just in terms of trying to understand one, I can only imagine the restoration process of like trying to figure out if this, because there'll be sequences where it'll cut to like an interaction between two characters that happened early on in the film as like a kind of flashback, but it's happening like, you know, 15-20 minutes later, and I'm sure that was probably just confusing.
Yeah. Well, it will be like they're finishing a conversation. It's like not even a flashback with action. It's like cut back to this conversation. Oh, and they said these 3 extra lines.
Yeah.
Which I imagine was just like, yeah, like you said, like excruciating to try to piece together.
But at the same time, I found that to also be this incredibly endearing quality about it, because it was almost, you know, like Michaud's attempt to provide you with the just various layers and kind of backstory to just being black in America. You couldn't just have that scene and it just be there and then move on. You had to almost offer this context in almost like a flashback setting. I mean, that's literally how the movie ends to an extent, where the Dr. Vivian character is looking for Sylvia, but they have to go back, and you have to kind of have this firm understanding of where she's coming from and her interactions with white Americans up to that point. Like I feel like the kind of the jumping between narratives that it does, to me, feels more of like kind of like an added layer to the understanding that you need to have for the characters in that moment, rather than being just kind of this weird narrative tick. But I don't know, am I just kind of pulling something out of my ass, or?
No, I think that makes sense. I feel like one thing that sets this movie apart from the other ones I've seen of his is this is the movie that makes the most concerted attempt to depict like the totality of the black experience in America, rather than just a facet of it. So you get like these little like asides or little vignettes, like the preacher who's, you know, preaching kind of different sermons to the black audiences and the white audiences in a way that he's like navigating, for, you know, the racism of his time and what the white audiences would have wanted him to hear, but also still trying to Trojan horse in, you know, sentiments about how white people are going to hell and things like that. And then you get like the scene where he just feels, he like kind of talks to the camera or something, where he's like talking about how debased he feels for have to have done that. And that's just like an aside that really has nothing to do with the plot needed the preacher, but it didn't need like us to examine what does it mean for the preacher to have to play to basically like code switch in a way that like keeps his position safe. Like what's the psychological toll of that?
I totally read that. Oh,
and there's just like all sorts of, go ahead, Lydia.
Sorry, I totally read that little vignette. I really liked it. But I totally read that little vignette as this is not directly comparable, but like the preacher is participating in this racist conception of his own race, kind of like, again, not totally comparable, like how women participate in sexism, like just against other women. And it's like individually you can get ahead, like you can get money from men, you can get money from white people by like totally on the surface buying into all of their horrible stereotypes and not really challenging them and just like playing their game, quote unquote. And like you will profit as a person, but like at what psychological toll? It really reminded me of like all of Bamboozled, basically. I think Spike Lee explores that kind of character type.
Well, I was reading something leading up to our chat, and they were talking about the old Ned scene, who's the preacher character, and how it was a complete it would be a complete shock in terms of African American characters at that time period, because you think about like how they were depicted in movies at that period of time. I mean, we referenced Birth of a Nation. You have the quote black rapist in that movie. The other examples he gives is just kind of like the you have like the more almost Uncle Tom characters. You have the ones kind of similar to the almost like the smiling, grinning buffoon, or something like it's constantly playing with these different deep stereotypes. In this one, you have like him playing in both of those roles, but then you just have this complete stripped down remorse point in it that completely kind of strips down again the what many people perceive of these kind of characters that you're typically seeing in cinema of these days.
What I think is like speaking of this, talking about the structure in this, and how it kind of seems haphazard, which I think it is at times, but one of the things that I think makes this movie super effective is the way that it kind of saves its thesis for the end. And I guess it has two theses, which we could get into in a minute. But like I'm specifically talking about like the flashback where we see Sylvia's past, in which her parents were lynched, and she was almost raped by a white man. And I think it's interesting that we see essentially like psychological and social violence occurring throughout most of the movie that then escalates into like physical violence in the form of this flashback. And within that flashback, you have the character, which I think you were talking about a second ago. Is it Ephraim? The servant character who's essentially playing he's playing into the minstrel stereotype in a way, because he thinks there's like a scene where he thinks he's among white people, he's safe, and those white people end up lynching him too. And I think that the flashback, which I thought was just like jarring and horrifying in the ways that it was intended to. Partially it's that because it shows the actions of these of people who are kind of forced or coerced into participating in white society are not actually safe. They've just been coerced into this really uncomfortable situation anyway. But if the stability of that is not really stable at all, and it's all violence in a way, and that violence becomes really obvious at the end.
What I not loved, but I thought it was like ironic, darkly funny, was after they lynch the Ephraim character, or whatever his name is, there's like a newspaper article intertitle clip that's like, he died accidentally. Nobody knows who did it.
Accidentally, yes.
It's like,
Well, and then the newspaper article also has like
this totally false account of what happened, and it's like this messed up flashback in the flashback. I thought that was awesome.
Yeah, and then also, isn't it the newspaper account that talks about like there will be like a judicial hearing or something like that to see what they'll do with the murderers, and it's just a lynch mob. Like there's nothing, judicial about it. It's like pure, mass hate. And
I mean, I thought that was awesome commentary on like how, white people's society like respectably cleans up after themselves. Like the official account, the newspaper article that goes down, it's like, oh, he was drunk, and then we had a trial and totally legally settled the matter.
Right. Well, and then that whole lynching sequence, like, because what leads to it is there's a murder in which his landlord is killed by this
another white man,
like poor white dude who he called white trash and compared to a black person, and that guy takes offense and murders him. And the staging is such that the character of Ephraim is confused and thinks that his black is he a servant, right? Not Ephraim, but
Landry, the foster father.
Landry. He I guess he'd be a sharecropper.
Right, yeah, he's a sharecropper. But anyway, like, as much as the movie, like, I think you read something about, like, turning, like, the barbarism back on, the white people in your intro to Zach. But it's interesting that character who, like, the quote-unquote, like, white trash character who kills the guy, the landlord, because he's been screwed and insulted, is the inciting incident for the lynch mob. It's not even just like a innocent misunderstanding or whatever. It's a misunderstanding perpetrated by like the way that the like landlord, like upper class of white people wants to, can perpetuate suffering on like everybody. And it's not like it's, not to say that it's not racism motivating as well, but there's like a class undercurrent to it. That's really interesting, and also like brings in like just that the kind of old wisdom about how like racism is also about keeping the white underclass in opposition to the black underclass, because otherwise they have the same enemy. Anyway, it's a very small part, but I thought that was really interesting as well.
I also let's talk a little bit about more of the kind of the cinematic technique of how he shoots the lynching sequence, and he has, because he's cross-cutting the lynching, the murder and lynching of the Landry family with the white man, the brother of the guy who was murdered, attempting to rape Sylvia, and he has this kind of cross-cutting effect to it. I was reading some kind of background information talking about how, and I think we had mentioned it a little bit actually way back when we had talked about Birth of a Nation, how the cross-cutting in that final sequence of Birth of a Nation was hailed as being so influential, but it's a very kind of similar technique in terms of how he's using the cross-cutting in order to establish the action and the narrative in this part. But Michaud, in the way that he uses it, feels even more penetrating than the Birth of a Nation example. I mean, what did you all make of kind of how he shot that sequence?
I think what's different about the cross-cutting in this example compared to Birth of a Nation, because in Birth of the Nation, it's this very exciting thing like, oh, is the Klan going to get there in time to rescue the white people? And you can kind of assume it's going to be a quote-unquote happy ending. But while you're watching the intercutting between the process of hanging the Landry family and then what's happening with Sylvia, like, it's much more horrifying. It's an effective like tension technique, but it's much more horrifying because like we kind of know that the outcome's not going to be good because this is in a flash. So like it's this technique of like delaying the inevitable of the fates of the Landry family, and we know that Sylvia lives because this is a flashback, but we're not quite sure how she's going to come out. So I think it's much more sophisticated, like creating tension and uncertainty using editing than like Birth of a Nation, which is just like, okay, like we're pretty sure they're gonna get there in time. Like,
I've not seen Birth of a Nation, but like,
don't.
I thought the cross. Yeah, you don't have to tell me. I thought the cross cutting here, like more than just like on a plot and like tension level, it's like really like aesthetically interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's like one cross cut that I thought like was super striking where Sylvia like pulls a knife, and like at the exact moment that she pulls a knife, it cuts to like they've set the bodies on fire at the lynching, and so like you just see like the instant she pulls the knife, it's like cuts to fire, and there's like a couple shots like that too that like make these really striking contrasts of not just like the text of the image, but the image themselves like are really juxtaposed in ways that are I thought really striking, and also like really horrifying. And also on the plot level, like the way that the rape gets resolved is maybe like the least happy way that a rape cannot happen, which is the rapist realizes that he is the father of the person he's trying to rape, which is like a really grotesque, like dark joke, which is, again, there's a sort of like relief in that, but not at all. Like there's nothing cathartic about the way that all that happens in this movie. Like it's all just like horrifying all the way down.
I'm gonna say Oscar Michaud gives that white dude way more credit for stopping than I would have, because I'm almost like, I don't know if that would have actually stopped some piece of shit racist dude. Like I really don't.
Yeah. Right. But if he was gonna stop, it's the darkest reason to have stopped. Can we talk about while we're on this, like the cutting, because right, and I guess this is like something that's contentious about the movie in the modern eye especially, but so you get this sequence, and then immediately after it cuts back to the frame of this flashback, which is this conversation that the doctor is having with the other character,
Alma,
right? And the doctor gives this whole speech about like, but thank goodness we're in America. This is our country, and so Zach, you sent something for us to read beforehand that kind of talks about this as Michaud kind of maybe playing respectability politics a little bit, because he has a history of like favoring like the intellectual, educated, middle class black experience over like the poor, quote unquote, unruly, black experience. But
yeah, there's the quote that he has in The Homesteader that is, some of the race, referring to African Americans, are very ignorant and vicious.
Yeah. But also, like, I feel like that he is smart enough with the cross-cutting in the rape and lynch sequence to know the meaning of, like, juxtaposition. And, like surely the irony of the speech isn't lost on... I mean, it felt deeply ironic to me when I watched it. I don't know. It's a really odd note to end the movie on.
Yeah, and the thing that I shared was interesting, because they were trying to kind of figure out what he was kind of going at. And I think one of the things that they mentioned was, for it being such a provocative movie, that maybe this was just the kind of one concession he made in terms of like giving it some sort of a resolved semi, kind of happy ending in order to tide the censors and stuff over. And then also, maybe he clearly had this. They kind of said that he shared values and sentiments with some of the artists and intellectuals associated with the Harlem Renaissance, and so that he kind of just came from that more social view. But yeah, it's such a strange sequence to end on, especially just the phrasing of how he points out that whole... I mean, he just learns this deeply disturbing and depressing story of her life and her family, and he's just like, be proud of our country, Sylvia. And
we're not immigrants.
At the very least, it's a little bit of, hey, read the
Not
room.
by choice. Jesus.
It's a little bit of read the room, dude.
Yeah.
You should probably like save this for later, not right after you heard the story of how what happened to her family and why she is in the situation she's in.
Yeah, it's so odd because the movie is so like with the preacher and with a lot of other characters, like I guess assimilationist ideas are kind of taken with a lot of nuance about like why characters would hold these ideas and like why the establishment is being accepted by these characters. And then this guy comes in and it doesn't feel like we get any sort of it feels really like just pasted on. And I don't know, like it just is, minutes after seeing the lynching, it just, I don't know, it just feels so deeply ironic in a way that I can't imagine it was purely a concession to just middle class bourgeois tastes or whatever.
Yeah. Lydia, what'd you make of the ending?
Okay, I'm trying to think about the best way to word this. I read a book last year by Ibram X. Kendi. It's called Stamped from the Beginning, A History of Racist Ideas in America. And he talks about during this period of time, at least the 1920 earliest century, people had this idea that was super racist, anti-black. It's just like, oh no, you just need to like educate black people, kind of ignoring all these social issues, not social, structural issues that are in place. And it's just like, no, education's the answer, and then everything will be fine. And I had a hard time telling if Michaud subscribed to that or not, because I mean, a lot of the first half is this story about trying to raise funds for a school, which unambiguously that is a good thing, and like education's a good thing, but I wasn't sure if it was coming from a place of the only thing holding black people is that they're just not enough money for them to get school, and overall America's basically good, and if we just get educated enough, it'll be a meritocracy, right? And like I had a hard time telling, like, do you really subscribe to that, or are you actually critiquing it?
I would say, based on some of his other movies, like there's a movie called Birthright that he did in 1939, which involves a black man who has been to Harvard, who graduates from Harvard and then moves to the South and is promptly like taken advantage of in some pretty like despicable ways. And he eventually comes out on top, but it's not really because of his education. And I guess, and I mean, that was made like, decades after this movie. So maybe he had like changed his ideas based on like, Jim Crow or whatever. I don't know. But at least in that movie, he regards education as a good thing, but also not the only thing that black people need to be stable and part of society functionally.
The other interesting thing from the reading that I think that I had sent to you all that I kind of wanted to touch on is the thesis of the piece, which I can link in the description if anybody else is interested in checking it out. But the author is talking a little bit about the portrayals of black masculinity in this film, as well as a lot of other Michaud's films. We talked a little bit about it, whether it's Ephraim or Old Ned. You also have I want to
talk about Conrad.
Yeah. There's the author describes Conrad, Dr. Vivian, as kind of the more traditional Michaud black male protagonist, because you have this kind of he's usually lighter, more kind of European. In more European stature, generally educated, and kind of aware of the social movements that need to take place, but it doesn't that mean necessarily that they're engaged in it. But yeah, I mean, what do you make of the men that he presents in this movie? And I guess we can start with Conrad, who is Sylvia's fiance until he spurns.
I was horrified that he put his hands around her neck, just 100%, which I know is totally different context. I don't think that's an excuse, but just the moment he thought that she was having some sort of affair, which like some totally orchestrated situation by her cousin or whatever, but it was just like immediately went to violence, and I was like, oh God, please no, good thing you're not marrying him.
I have this feeling like kind of surveying. I didn't get this watching the movie, but kind of like looking back and like surveying like all the characters in the movie, like is it it's the male characters who get all the like all the turns, right? They get all the like social commentary bits, right? The female characters are kind of like vessel. Am I reading that right? Like they're either doing the domestic like marriage plots or doing the education stuff, but none of them are really given those like trenchant characterizations of like, the like the preacher or the even like what's his name?
Even Sylvia with the school. I mean, she at least. It's not necessarily.
She doesn't have any like character
she doesn't
arc,
have.
though.
She's like kind of like this like do-gooding angel, I guess, whose only goal is to do this, like get the school money, and the same thing is like for the like the progressive woman that she meets, who ends up giving her like $50,000 or whatever.
Hold on.
She hits her with the car.
Real quick.
I did like the racist
the
woman.
progressive woman who hits her
like
with her
literally
car.
in the sense of the historical milieu, like the kind of like progressive women who also like spearheaded the abstinence and like that.
Oh, okay.
That's what I mean. Not in like the modern sense of progressive.
I mean, she hits her with her car. That's how they.
The ones who eventually eventually the ones who led to prohibition as well. But yeah, I mean, like even her, like she's there as like a pure like here is something I am giving you. I don't know, like they don't. My feeling is that the men are better characterized in this movie, and the women are more broadly characterized. Maybe that's not true.
I mean, they're extremely passive. Because how Sylvia gets her money for the school, like she's trying to raise money, but when ultimately she gets hit by a car, and then the lady feels bad.
Yeah, that's. I like. There's a line in this piece where the author is just like, the only way that a black woman can be heard by by somebody who's white is they have to hit them with their car and feel somewhat bad.
And also goaded into it by like a more racist person than them, right?
That
She was kind of
me up.
wavering, and then the Uber waitress came in, and it was like, no.
Yeah, so part of it is she had to prove she wasn't racist, so she gave her $50,000 instead of $5,000.
Look,
To be fair, that's the most
I'm
truthful
happy.
thing. Unfortunately, that seems as prescient today as ever. Within Our Gates, if you'd like to check it out, as Michael mentioned at the top of this part, Within Our Gates, as well as a number of other early African American silent films, are available on Netflix as part of the Kino Lorber Pioneers of African American Cinema collection. So I would recommend checking that out. It has a lot of interesting additions in there, and a lot of other Oscar Michaud films as well, if you're curious to learn more about him. But yeah, thank you so much for listening. You can find more about Cinematary on Facebook at facebook.com/Cinematary, on Twitter at handle @Cinematary, and on Letterboxd at letterboxd.com/Cinematary, where we post all the movies that we talked about in this episode. Of course, if you'd like to support our Patreon, we're going to be coming out with some nice goodies for the Young Critics series, so it's no better time than now to join the Patreon page. But thank you to our patrons: Cam, Chad Newsom, Christopher Metcalf, Maggie, Matthew Lingo, Miranda Barnwall, Ron Hayes, Tyler Chandler, Whitney Rio Ross, and Will Carroll. Thank you so much for your patronage. And
Announce the live pod.
Lydia, you gotta let me do my job, man. We talked about it last week, but I'll go ahead and mention this as well. Thank you, Lydia. Next week, we'll be continuing this series with 1925's Battleship Potemkin. For those, if you would like to join the Patreon, we're going to have some fun additions to that. So the normal episode of Cinematary is going to be a recording of our live podcast that we will be doing on June 26th at Central Cinema in Knoxville, Tennessee. We're going to have a panel. It will be myself, Michael, Andrew, and Kelly Robinson, who hosts the series for Central Cinema. We're going to be talking about that film and probably we'll be talking about some very provocative images that Eisenstein comes up with in that one. But if you would like to join the Patreon to get this special bonus episode, I also have a chat with Luca Ardijak, the professor from University of Maryland. He has written a book on montage and images in Eisenstein films, and we had a nice chat about Battleship Potemkin and why it kind of still has this importance today and why it's still studied, and a little bit of the theories behind how Eisenstein used montage and imagery in cinema to kind of differentiate it from being just like theater, just like art in that way. And so it's an interesting chat. We'll have both of those things for Battleship Potemkin, so please check it out next week. But yeah, we'll have some more info on our Twitter, Facebook page, all that good stuff. But thank you guys for listening. We'll see you next week.